أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to our series, Life, the Islamic Answer, the theme of knowledge and reason in Islam. And in this lecture where we will, inshallah, continue the discussion that we began the last time that we met, when we started to talk about the types of knowledge that Islam advises and instructs to learn. Today, inshallah, we want to go very quickly over a recap of what we covered in a couple of minutes. And then we begin with the topic at hand, inshallah. Given that the first discussion, the first lecture that we had was an introductory lecture to this topic of the types of knowledge in Islam. After a brief overview of the entire series of Life, the Islamic Answer, in which we try to explain not only the content that we are trying to cover in this series, but also the general approach, the methodology of what we're trying to achieve by focusing on the scripture itself, by focusing on the Holy Qur'an and the narrations of Ahlulbayt alayhim as-salam, to understand what our religion wants from us, especially in those areas that are most crucial and important for us. We provided a quick overview of what we have covered until now, the importance of knowledge and reason in Islam, that the alternative of jahl is not an option for us, foolishness and ignorance are not an option, and that therefore in our religion, knowledge and reason are not only important, they are necessary. We cannot be considered a good Muslim, a practicing Muslim, without being on a journey of knowledge, and this journey never ends, as we went through and explained when we went through the presentation of the verses and the narrations related to that topic. And so therefore we said, when we look at what our religion says to learn, we saw that it gives more importance to meeting two conditions than focusing on the type of knowledge that we learn. As important as the types of knowledge are, there are two conditions that are more important than what knowledge I am learning. Those two conditions are my intention, my intent from learning. Why am I learning? What do I want to do with this knowledge? And secondly, that I actually act on the knowledge that I have. So acting on the knowledge and having intent is more important than the type of knowledge that I learn, one, and two, the quantity of knowledge that I have. It is more important to have the right intent and to act on a little of knowledge than to have a lot of knowledge but I do nothing with it, or I acquired it or used it with wrong intentions. So once we understood all of that, then we started to go back to the journey of becoming someone who acquires knowledge. This allows us to slowly start building what we called the community of knowledge, a community of believers who come together around knowledge in Islam. The first element, the most important ingredient or element in this community is the learner. And so we spent a bit of time understanding what it means to be a learner in Islam. And then the moment that you acquire any knowledge, now you are carrying knowledge, you are going to be in a position of responsibility towards that knowledge to share it with others. And so once we were done talking about the learner, we talked about the teacher or the scholar, the person who carries knowledge. And then we said, what about everyone else? This is where we talk about everyone else in the community. And we said that community is made up of everyone in the community. Everyone has to find a place and a role and a responsibility for themselves in the knowledge community, one. And then we started to focus on specific groups that either our religion has mentioned explicitly when it comes to the community of knowledge, or that we think are important to address and discuss because these are issues that our communities face. And so we looked at the youth, children and the youth. Then we looked at the family as a unit. We looked at women specifically in the community of knowledge. We looked at the role of the intellectual. And we said the intellectual is anyone who does not have specialized knowledge in Islam. They are not a specialist in fiqh or tafsir or aqaid or akhlaq or any of the other disciplines. You may know finance, you may know project management, you may know any other field. You fall in the category of the intellectual. And we saw that there is a huge role for the non-specialist, who is non-specialist in the religious sense, to be playing a very important role in the community of knowledge, in the Islamic community of knowledge. Once all of this was out of the way, we are now back to the question of where do I start and what are the actual types of knowledge that our religion tells us that we should be studying. And so we went through a number of questions that any of us may have, and this is what the topic of this specific series is trying to resolve. In about 15 or so lectures, we want to look at the types of knowledge that our religion tells us to study, which may include, for instance, where do I learn? Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah. Where do I start learning? What should I be studying? Should I be more of a generalist or a specialist? Should I go very deep and become an expert in one field? Or should I be more of a generalist? Or is there a place for both? And then how much space and how much room do I give to religious knowledge versus non-religious knowledge as part of the instructions of our religion? And then we even mentioned things related to the material causes of the world that we can learn versus what we can call the supernatural, right? So should I be focusing more of my knowledge on understanding what we may refer to as al-ghaybiyat, things where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may intervene in the world, not through normal causes? Do I learn biology and chemistry and engineering for the world to work the way it's supposed to? Or do I focus more on learning, how to perform the prayers that allow me to achieve certain results in this world? And so we went through a number of these types of knowledge. So it's basically kind of a table of contents of what we're trying to cover in this specific series. And today we are really at the beginning of the series, so we are talking about the general principles before getting into the specifically mentioned types of knowledge. So with all of that said, we are now at the point where we can start to talk about what is it that our religion tells us about knowledge and what should we be studying. The first point that we need to talk about is the general value of knowledge in my religion. And all of these we studied in a lot more detail earlier in the series, so this is just to establish the logical transition here, not to establish these points, otherwise each one of these was discussed at length earlier in the series. So the value of knowledge in Islam. Secondly, therefore, we should say, since knowledge is so important and so valuable in Islam, we might think that therefore acquiring all knowledge is desirable. It's something that our religion says, go and do. Go learn all knowledge that you can. So we'll talk about the general desirability of knowledge. The third point is, but we will see that our religion says that there is a lot of knowledge to be learned. So what does it say about that? How do I manage this abundance of knowledge that exists? 4, this is going to bring us to start talking about, we will not finish the topic today, but to start talking about prioritization. How do I choose and how do I prioritize the types of knowledge that I need? And I don't know if we'll get to general principles, but we may be able to touch on it a little bit today. So we start with the value of knowledge. In our religion, knowledge has tremendous value. Something that we established earlier in the series is that knowledge is used in different ways. Here we are referring to knowledge in its true sense, as in you are learning something worthwhile, something true, something real, something that God wants you to learn. This type of knowledge, it is difficult to find anything in our religion that is as precious as this knowledge, that is as valuable as this knowledge. Knowledge, however, is usually intertwined with another topic. Sometimes they're distinguished, but most of the time they go together, which is reason. And that's why the theme of our entire series is knowledge and reason in Islam, because sometimes it is difficult to make up where knowledge starts and stops, where reason starts and stops, your ability to use that knowledge. But these are two different things. Often they are intertwined. In our religion, there is nothing that has the value, the richness of the details that we have, and the value of anything is unmatched when we're comparing knowledge and reason versus anything else. It comes before anything else. And we saw many hadith, many verses of the Quran that establish this very clearly. This is done through multiple ways. First, God attributes the role of teaching knowledge to Himself. And God doesn't attribute everything to Himself. God could attribute everything to Himself, but He doesn't. He establishes a general rule that anything that happens in the world comes from God, but then He picks and chooses what things He attributes to Himself. God could say everything belongs to me, but He doesn't. He says this is Kitabullah, this is the book of God. And this is the house of God. And this is a prophet of God. He picks and chooses some things because those things are a lot more reflective of God and bringing back directly to God as opposed to other things. So when God says, and one of my roles, one of the sources of knowledge in the world is myself, this is one of the things that I do, is to teach knowledge, to ensure that knowledge is acquired from me. This is something that gives to us an indication, a clue that this is something very important. God wants us to notice this. And we'll see this in some of the verses of the Quran. Then we see that when God talks about prophets and messengers, He says that one of the main functions of these people that God sends to humanity to guide them is knowledge, is imparting knowledge, is carrying knowledge and sharing knowledge. It's not just teaching you how to pray, how to fast. They are here to help you manage this whole notion of knowledge. Then we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the human being being a different kind of creature specifically because of the knowledge that they carry. 4, that among human beings, that which gives a greater value and merit to a human being over another is knowledge. 5, we see that when we come to the world of believers, one of the main, if not the main way in which a believer distinguishes himself from another believer, has more value and more merit, is through knowledge. This gives us, in general, the idea that knowledge is extremely valuable in Islam. You may not be able to find this everywhere. In Islam, this is very clear, very well established. A few verses in the Quran very quickly to establish this chain in this way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins revealing Quran revelation to the world by the first 5 verses of Surah Al-Alaq, chapter 96. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Iqra' bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqa al-insana min 'alaq, iqra' wa rabbuka al-akram, alladhi 'allama bil-qalam, 'allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by saying, read in the name of your Lord, who created. He created the human being from a clot of blood. We're not going to provide a full commentary here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about Himself. He says, read, and your Lord is most noble, He who taught by the pen. And He comes back again and He says, taught the human being that which he did not know. Allama al-insan. What the human being knows comes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is attributing it directly to Himself. He says, I'm the one who taught the human being that which he did not know. Okay. Another verse. Surah Al-Rahman. Right from the beginning again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing Himself. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman, allama al-Qur'an, khalaqa al-insan, allamahu al-bayan. Once again, twice, in 4 verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the most merciful, Ar-Rahman, He taught the Qur'an, He created the human being, He taught him expression, He taught him speech. This is all linked to knowledge. Knowledge is being attributed directly to God. Then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the role of prophets. This is one verse among many others. This one we should all know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Jum'ah, He says, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. It is He who sent among the ummis. I kept the ummis as is. The easy translation here would be those who are illiterate, the unlettered. Okay, but the ummi can mean other things as well. Let's keep it as ummis for now. It is He who sent among those who did not know a messenger from among themselves, who recited His verse to them, who purifies them, and who teaches them. One of the main tasks of the Prophet is teaching and imparting knowledge, the scripture and the wisdom, when they were before then truly in great misguidance. What is allowing them to leave the misguidance, the great misguidance, is in part the knowledge. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks in general about the human being, and specifically those who achieve the status of being the ones who are the best representatives of God on earth. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. There's a lot that can be said here. Perhaps later in the series we will come back to these verses. These are extremely rich when it comes to the discussion that we are having about the types of knowledge and what it means. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this story that He decides to create a Khalifa, a successor or a representative on earth for Himself. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when the angels objected initially, saying, are you going to create someone who causes corruption and sheds blood on earth? He told them, I know that which you do not know. And then the first thing that becomes the distinguishing feature of this entity that God is creating to make Him to His representative on earth is what? Is His knowledge. And this is what the angels did not know. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and He taught Adam the names. All of them. We'll come back to the commentary. For now, let's just read it as it's written. And He taught Adam the names, all of them. Then He presented them to the angels, and He said, tell me their names if you are truthful. This is all about knowledge. And the angels said, they said, glory be to you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. You are the all-knowing, the wise. He said, O Adam, inform them of their names. So when Adam did, he said, did I not tell you that I know the secrets of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you conceal? The distinguishing feature of Prophet Adam alayhi salam here is what? His knowledge. The angels did not have this knowledge, and right away they realized. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked them, do you know what I'm presenting to you? They said no. So to show them the rank of Adam above theirs, that he is superior to them, when they were objecting that they should have been the Khalifa, He told Adam, show your knowledge to them. Tell them what you have learned. Knowledge is elevating the human being distinguishing the human being as a creature even beyond the rank of the angels. And then when we come to the believers, within the world of the believers, is it enough to pray and to fast? Is that what really matters? Is it only about worship? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here He says, أَمَّنْ هُوَ قَانِتٌ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ سَاجِدًا وَقَائِمًا يَحْذَرُ الْآخِرَةَ وَيَرْجُو رَحْمَةَ رَبِّهِ قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ إِنَّمَا يَتَذَكَّرُ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. In Surah Al-Zumar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so this is someone, if you can imagine in your mind what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing here, there is someone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, who is standing and prostrating, performing prayers in the middle of the night. Is he who is devoutly praying in the hours of the night, prostrating to the ground, standing in prayer, fearing the hereafter, hoping for the mercy of his Lord. You have the image of this person. He is entirely devout, entirely in worship. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to show the distinction of this person. You would think He's going to say something about their worship, about their actions, about how devout they are. What's their distinguishing feature, this person who is acting this way? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, say, are they equals, the one who knows and the one who does not know? It's about knowledge. The distinguishing feature of this person is not that he is standing in the middle of the night worshiping. It's the knowledge that they carry. So what about this trait that God just described? He's in the middle of the night worshiping. This is an outcome of the knowledge. It's not about the worship. You acquire the right knowledge, it will make you act in the right way. The knowledge is much more important. That's why we focus on the knowledge. The focus should not be about go and worship at night. The focus should be on acquiring the right knowledge that will compel you all by itself, on its own, to make you get up in the middle of the night and worship. These are not the same thing. This is the right knowledge. This comes from within you. No one needs to come from the outside and tell you, get up, don't keep sleeping at night. Get up and go pray to God. If you're not doing that, there's something missing in your knowledge. So therefore, from all of this, inshallah, it is clear that we have established, generally speaking, that knowledge is very important in our religion. We went all the way from the roles for how God Himself views knowledge and His role with regards to knowledge, how important it is in the roles of those people that God sends to guide humanity, how important it is to distinguish the human being, how important it is to distinguish the believer, one believer from another. All of that, clear. So the outcome from this should be, therefore I should just go and acquire as much knowledge as I can. And remember, all this discussion is so that I know what types of knowledge I should be learning. So here, general desirability of knowledge. Something that is desirable, something that is good, that I want, that I desire. So the first point should be, knowledge is generally desirable. I should acquire knowledge, or as much knowledge as I can. One, learning is good. These are the high-level principles, so that when we go through the verses and the hadith, you see them clearly. Learning is a good thing. I should therefore learn as much as I can. More knowledge is better, right? This is just the logical conclusion from what we just said. We're going to add the constraints and the limits and the conditions as we go. That there is a necessity and obligation to learn. We're going to come back to that, inshallah, the next lecture. Because it's one thing to say it is really good to learn, it's another to say there is an obligation to learn. There is a wajib to learn. We'll come back to that, inshallah. that it is better than any other act, the better than worship. We talked a little bit about that. General desirability of knowledge. We have verses in the Quran, for instance this one in Surah Taha, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Holy Prophet to say, He tells him, He's teaching him to say, وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, and say, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. This is how desirable knowledge is. That God tells His Prophet, the messenger of God, and say, constantly pray to God, tell Him this is not something you do once. This is a general state. Always be saying, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. So this establishes for us the general desirability of knowledge. Elsewhere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to all of us. He says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of the remembrance if you do not know. Whenever you find yourself not knowing, ask those who know. Once again, general desirability of knowledge. Again, we should conclude, therefore, perhaps, always learning is good. I should learn everything I can, as much of it as I can. No restrictions. But then we start to see that our religion starts to give us some conditions and some limitations and some context. So for instance, it says that there is a lot of knowledge out there. I'm calling it an abundance of knowledge. There is, in fact, too much knowledge. There is too much knowledge for anyone to learn everything. And perhaps not all knowledge is desirable. Inshallah, the logic is clear where we're headed. A few ahadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam. In a first hadith, very bluntly, the Imam simply says, الْعِلْمُ أَكْثَرُ مِنْ أَنْ يُحْصَى. There is much more knowledge. Knowledge is much more abundant than to have an end, than to be countable, than to be something that you can limit or that you can discern fully. In another hadith, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, الْعِلْمُ أَكْثَرُ مِنْ أَنْ يُحَاطَ بِهِ. Knowledge is much more abundant than to be fully encompassed. And another hadith, مَنِ ادَّعَى مِنَ الْعِلْمِ غَايَتَهُ فَقَدْ أَظْهَرَ مِنْ جَهْلِهِ نِهَايَتَهُ. The one who claims that they have achieved knowledge fully, full knowledge of anything, the only thing that they have truly done is to show everyone how much ignorance they have. If you claim that you know everything about anything. So here, by the way, this has another, it's called a corollary. If you accept this, it's ignorant to claim that you know all knowledge about anything. That's one. And two, perhaps it's going to be also ignorant and foolish to aim to learn all of the knowledge. These go together. Which brings us to, therefore, the topic of having to start prioritizing knowledge, selecting knowledge, and the conditions and the criteria that we should be using to start choosing which knowledge do I learn and which knowledge do I not learn at all, or which knowledge is important to learn but there's something that needs to be learned before it because it's even more important. So in some cases, we might end up saying there is some knowledge that is simply not important to learn. Just leave it aside. And in some cases, we're going to say all of these types of knowledge are important, but you have to sequence them properly. You have to start in the right place because that's, if you have to choose one between these two, one between these three, then choose this one. It's not that the other two are not important, It's not that the other two are not necessary. But if your time is limited and your effort is limited and your ability is limited, you have to choose. You have to prioritize. And we need criteria to teach us and to help us prioritize in the right way. And here we have the beginnings of the indications that we need to learn this prioritization process. So in the first hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا خَيْرَ فِي عِلْمٍ لَا يَنْفَعُ. This is part of a long piece of advice from Imam Ali alayhi salam. At some point he says this line, and know that there is no good that can come from knowledge or a type of knowledge that is not beneficial. That's exactly what we're looking for. The Imam is now saying not all knowledge is beneficial. Before we were saying all knowledge is good. There's a lot of knowledge and we should go and learn it all and say, my God, increase me in knowledge all the time. Now Imam Ali alayhi salam is saying, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا خَيْرَ فِي عِلْمٍ لَا يَنْفَعُ. There are types of knowledge that are not beneficial. And so there is no good that will come out of these. Okay, what else? Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about the importance of having, I'm going to call it here in my translation, reason. But we can talk at length about what this means. He says when you learn information, knowledge, when you acquire knowledge, it should be accompanied and supported by reason. So in one hadith he says, كُلُّ عِلْمٍ لَا يُؤَيِّدُهُ عَقْلٌ مَضَلَّةٌ. Every knowledge that is not supported by, that is not accompanied by reason, is in fact misguidance. We're going to talk about that in a second. In another hadith, مَنْ زَادَ عِلْمُهُ عَلَى عَقْلِهِ كَانَ وَبَالًا عَلَيْهِ. Whoever has knowledge and they have more knowledge than they have reason, that knowledge that they have is going to turn into a harm for themselves. There is such a thing as having too much knowledge. Because in those cases, you're not looking at the knowledge, you're looking at the tools to use that knowledge, which is reason, which is wisdom, which is judgment. Your ability to know what to do with the knowledge that you have. This is something that to us, we should find many examples for in life. For a child in your life, you would not say, knowledge is a really good thing and they should therefore learn everything there is to know about everything right away. There is such a thing as having too much knowledge for the amount of reason that you have. If you do not have the intellectual maturity to know what to do with that knowledge will quickly and easily turn into something harmful. Maybe it's better for a child not to know how to play with electricity or a knife before I put it in front of them and they know all about it. And this, by the way, applies throughout life. Imam Ali is not talking about children. I'm just using it to simplify. This is actually an incredibly important topic. A topic that is discussed by huge philosophers and those who want to engineer society. They talk about this topic specifically. Especially after World War II, there has been a lot of literature, a lot of works that talk about this point. Maybe not in this language, but there is such a thing as having too much knowledge. If you do not have the reason, the morality, the wisdom to know how to use that knowledge will turn into something harmful. For instance, You could look at the cases of someone who is a scientist. They have all the abilities in the world, for instance, to manipulate and apply their knowledge in biology and create biological weapons, or to do genetic manipulations, or. There is such a thing as having too much knowledge. If your behavior is not going to be managed, supervised, that there is an oversight, something higher than this knowledge, telling you how to use this knowledge, and what is right and what is wrong to do with this knowledge, then the knowledge by itself on its own can quickly become something harmful. This can apply to all sorts of fields and disciplines in life. You can apply it to finance and economics, you can apply it to technology, you can apply it to sciences in general. And this is exactly what happened, by the way. That's why I mentioned World War II. That's what many philosophers feel happened around World War II. That the human ability to create weapons that can create such massive destruction, by the way, today we can't even compare to the rudimentary primitive weapons we had in World War II. All of that happened, they said, because we had too much knowledge and not enough reason, and not enough wisdom, and not enough morality and ethics to guide us and to teach us. That weapon that you create is not going to be created overnight. These are gigantic programs with billions of dollars behind them, working day in and day out with thousands upon thousands of researchers and billions of dollars for years on end to generate and to create this weapon. All of this is happening because there are enough people who think that this is okay. And at the end, if you say that you are generating a world war, you can't blame a few. Because this is now entire states and entire nations at war. Enough of them that you call it a world war. How can humanity let this happen? Clearly, and this was the reaction, clearly the issue is not that we don't have enough knowledge. They said, we have plenty of knowledge. There's something else we're missing that makes us use the knowledge in this way. And this is where you have things like critical studies and, today if you are in any program in the sciences or in engineering, I'm sure many of you have studied the ethics of science, the ethics of engineering, the ethics of biology. So that at least they say they gave you some rudimentary tools. And when you graduate from engineering, especially in civil engineering, they'll give you the ring to remind you that, this is a responsibility and that there are people's lives who depend on the decisions you make. So be ethical and be moral and don't cut corners. The standards are here for a reason. All of this is because of the lessons learned in society. This didn't come out of thin air. And then this whole discussion can also be applied in religion. We haven't talked about religious knowledge yet. But there's also such a thing in religion as having too much knowledge for the reason that you have, for the intellectual maturity that you have or you don't have. Sometimes people say, for instance, I'm going to start studying a certain field. This looks like really interesting. I'm going to start studying falsafa and irfan, to use an example that everybody jumps into. Not studied in the right way, not having the right tools to study it, without any doubt, if you go far enough, it will shake your belief. And many people end up being atheists. They leave religion behind. Because there's a lot of questions and a lot of deep thinking and a lot of huge minds that have worked upon the work of centuries upon centuries of other thinkers. And here you are, with your innocent, beautiful, simple little mind, coming to all of this, thinking you can take it all on. These greatest, most complicated, most deep of questions, you can take it all on directly, by yourself, on your own, you're reading your book at night. This is why sometimes there is such a thing as having too much knowledge. Not all knowledge is desirable. If you're learning, learn it the right way, with someone who knows how to teach it, to have the right tools and in the right sequence. This is not to say don't go and learn it. I'm of those who say 100% go learn it, and go learn it all, and go to the ends of it. But do it right. In the right way, with the right tools, with the right teachers, and the right sequence, so that this becomes something beneficial to you, not something harmful, not something that turns against you. The point from this is to become better, to become stronger, to become better equipped, to get closer to God, whatever your intent is. If this turns into something harmful, you've gone completely the other way. And then, so this is all when I'm focusing just on the content of the knowledge. The epistemic tools, the tools of knowledge. But there's also another dimension to all of this. We didn't spend too much time on it. I alluded to it. But in religious sciences, this is even more the case and even more important, that there's a moral and there's an ethical dimension to knowledge. It is easy for someone to start thinking, I know a lot. And I am a lot more important than I truly am, because I know all of this. This is a sign of not having enough reason, and not having enough wisdom, and not having enough morality and ethics. For those who work out, it's like having an imbalance. You're working on some groups of muscles and not the ones that you should also be working on to create balanced strength or balanced physique. And that creates problems in your body. I'll use the guys as an example. Many guys work their chests all the time. You don't work your back enough. This creates an imbalance. It brings your shoulders to the front, it ruins your posture, and it creates problems in your shoulders later in life. This is no different. You need to work those muscles together. Having too much knowledge and not enough ethics is perhaps an indication that you haven't focused on all of the muscles at the same time. It's not just about an accumulation of data and information. It's what am I doing to my soul to make sure that it can handle all of this information? Or is everything just feeding my ego and my I? I know more. I know better. I'm now entitled to criticize everyone, and everyone is wrong, and I'm the only one who is right. As opposed to more knowledge, meaning there is so much more out there that I should be learning, and I should be modest, and I should be humble, and not have an ego. The more knowledge I have, the more modest I should be, as Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says. And this applies with myself, between myself and God, no one knows. And this applies how I carry myself in the world. I have a little bit of knowledge. I have to become the next best, biggest, greatest teacher, or preacher, or speaker, and present the information as though I have it all. These are big problems, and we see a lot of these in our communities. And sometimes, in a lot of cases, this is the issue. You have a lot of knowledge, and perhaps too much knowledge, for your reason. You don't have enough reason. You don't have enough of the judgment, the morality, the wisdom that should come with having all this knowledge to know how to use it. To know your limits. To know where to say, I don't know. And we'll come back to that, inshallah, a little bit later in the series. How the Holy Prophet says knowledge is three things. There's one, there's two, and the third thing of knowledge, having knowledge, is saying, I don't know. That's your modesty, humility. Say, I don't know. Don't be shy. Don't hide it. And say it out of humility. To know half of something is not to know half, is to not know. Say, I don't know. You only know half of it. You're not done learning it. Maybe the second half will contradict what you learned in the first half. Say, I don't know. In any case. I had promised that I'll keep the lessons for this series shorter. It's late at night and I'm trying to learn how to keep my lessons shorter. So inshallah we'll end not soon, not too long after this. There's this hadith that I'm mentioning here from Imām al-Kadhim alayhi salam that he quotes about something that happened at the time of the Holy Prophet. This is an important hadith. This is mentioned in all the books of the Muslims, very well-known story. I'm not mentioning the full hadith here. The second part of the hadith, the Holy Prophet is going to go into the types of knowledge people should learn. We're not there yet. We'll come back to that inshallah, perhaps next week. If not, the week after. So I'll keep the last sentence of this hadith without mentioning it. It's not here. The first part, though, I think is entirely part of what we're discussing. Imām al-Kadhim alayhi salam says, دخل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله المسجد فإذا جماعة قد أطافوا برجل فقال ما هذا فقيل علامة. Imam al-Kadhim says, the Holy Prophet entered into the mosque and he saw a group of people gathered, they have encircled a man. So he said, what is going on here? What is this? They replied, this is ʿAllāmah. Allama in Arabic is the intensive form of alim, right? Like fa'ala. The construction of the word means a lot of, full intensity of something. So in this case, like the highest level of a scholar, the most masterful, exceptional, encyclopedic scholar. He's a allama. He's not a alim, he's a allama. So they told him, we have gathered around this man because he is allama. فَقَالَ وَمَا الْعَلَّامَ? As though the Holy Prophet doesn't know what the word means. So clearly that's not what he is asking. He told them, وَمَا الْعَلَّامَ? فَقَالُوا أَعْلَمُ النَّاسِ بِأَنْسَابِ الْعَرَبِ وَوَقَائِعِهَا وَأَيَّامِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ وَالْأَشْعَارِ وَالْعَرَبِيَّةِ. So he said, and what is allama? What makes this man allama? They said he is the most knowledgeable of all people regarding the genealogies of the Arabs, their lines, their family lines, and their battles, and their days of the pre-Islamic era, and their poetry, and their language. This is what this man specializes in. He knows all of this, and he knows more about all of this than anyone else. And therefore he's allama. So the Holy Prophet said, قال فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله ذاك علم لا يضر من جهله ولا ينفع من علمه. The Prophet said, this is a kind of knowledge which neither harms the one who is ignorant of it, nor does it benefit the one who knows it. That by itself, on its own, is a knowledge that if you do not know it, if you do not know the genealogies of the Arabs, and if you do not know the poetry of the Arabs, and if you do not know all the histories and the battles of the Arabs before the Islamic era, this is not going to harm you. Not knowing, being ignorant of that knowledge, does not bring you harm. And having all this knowledge is not going to truly benefit you. And so here again, first, the Holy Prophet ﷺ established a rule for us. I want to start prioritizing. I want to start selecting. The Holy Prophet gave me a rule. And interestingly enough, he flipped it, to me at least, I would say. It was very interesting and surprising when the Holy Prophet says, today if someone would ask anyone, how should I prioritize knowledge? Most likely, many of us would say, go with that which is most beneficial to you. Go with that which brings you greater benefit. The Holy Prophet added a step before that. He said, not knowing that knowledge. And to me, that's amazing. The Prophet is trying to make it easier for me. He's trying to simplify my life. By default, should I learn every knowledge? So the Holy Prophet begins with, what happens if I don't learn this knowledge? He starts with the negative. He doesn't tell me what happens if I learn it. He begins with, what happens if I don't? Let's start with that. Is there harm in not learning this type of knowledge? That's the first question. And that's what he used. He said, everything you have described about this man, this Allama, this is a type of knowledge that if you do not know it, it doesn't harm you. So that becomes my first criteria. There is some type of knowledge that I don't know about, or I don't know enough about. Should I learn it? Question one. If I don't learn this knowledge, does it bring me harm? Does my ignorance of this type of knowledge bring me harm? That's one. Two, because if it doesn't bring me harm, that doesn't necessarily mean that I should learn it or shouldn't yet. Maybe it's neutral and I should stay indifferent. The Holy Prophet's second question is, and is it truly desirable because it's going to bring you a benefit? It may not bring you harm, but it may also not bring you any benefit. So this becomes a two-step process. I start with, is it harmful not to learn this? And then two, what is the benefit from learning this? Okay, so that's one. The second thing that's important and interesting here, we'll come back to this hadith. There's a lot to say about this hadith, about the behavior of the Holy Prophet in general. There's always a lot to think about. When the Holy Prophet asks, what is Allama? I have to stop. Say, why is the Holy Prophet asking these people, what is Allama? Because the Holy Prophet doesn't want to accept social norms. And he is teaching people not to accept social norms. I don't go along with it just because everyone goes along with it. Everyone just went along with it and they called this man Allama. And he didn't attack. And he used reason. And he told them, define what Allama is. Explain your reasoning, how this man came to be Allama. So when they explained their criteria, he responded with a very clear argument. I should apply this type of thinking in general to social norms. When society in general considers this is the definition of someone who is successful, this is the definition of someone who's a scholar, this is the definition of Allama, this is the definition of whatever it is. The Holy Prophet did not accept it at face value. The Holy Prophet is too polite, but I will say it for him. Who cares how you define Allama? I will tell you who should be Allama. What type of knowledge should the person carry? Then they will meet my definition of Allama, or my definition of success in life. Whatever it is. Don't accept the social norm just because the masses have accepted it. And this is going to be important. Later in the series, we're coming back to this. But the Holy Prophet is teaching them very gently and very politely. What is Allama? What makes this man Allama? And then with two words, he dismantles the entire definition. And he says this is not type of knowledge that harms you if you don't have, nor does it benefit you if you have it. So this now becomes our criteria. conclusion. I want to go back to a couple of things. I think I skipped over this slide, perhaps. I may have skipped over this slide, because the conclusion is related to this slide. There was a lot to pick from. I chose this one quickly. In this slide, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, العلم أكثر من أن يحصى أو من أن يحاط به فخذ من كل شيء أحسنه. In the previous slide, I just established that there is too much knowledge. There is an abundance of knowledge, right? By the way, you'll see that this is my approach. I choose the ahadith from the simplest and then we build slowly on them. And the first layer of ahadith, the ahadith are saying there is just too much knowledge. Don't claim and don't try to learn all knowledge. Don't claim to know anything, everything about anything, and don't try to go learn everything. It's impossible. So then what? And then what is same expression. العلم أكثر من أن يحصى. العلم أكثر من أن يحاط به. There's too much knowledge for anyone to try to encompass it all, to understand it all, to learn it all. Therefore, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, فَخُذْ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ أَحْسَنَ. Therefore, go and choose and select and take from every type of knowledge the best there is in it. Looks very simple, but this is very profound. The second hadith, similar, a little bit more metaphorical. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, خُذُوا مِنْ كُلِّ عِلْمٍ أَحْسَنَهُ فإن النحل يأكل من كل زهر أزينه فيتولد منه جوهران نفيسان أحدهما فيه شفاء للناس والآخر يستضاء به. Again, same idea. Take from every type of knowledge that which is best in it. And then he says, the bees, he uses as an example, the bees consume from every flower what is best in it. And from that process, it generates two, I wrote previous, that's precious, two precious treasures from this process. The first one, the honey, the first one contains healing for the people. And the second one creates guidance for the people. There's a reason why the Imam is using these words. He doesn't say honey and wax. Right? He just says the function of it so that you use it in the same way with your knowledge. So that your knowledge, once you do what he is saying, which is go and learn the best from every field, from every type of knowledge, go learn the best that it has to offer, you are able to do two things. You are able to heal. The healing may or may not be physical. And you are able to guide, to create light, which is to guide. You show the path. These are general rules. They look very simple. I'll go to, at the end, this is the beyond the scripture. I'll try to add beyond the scripture from time to time. So beyond the Holy Quran and its verses, beyond the ahadith. This brings us to a discussion of, and we asked a bit of a question around this, should I become a generalist or should I become a specialist? I think Imam Ali alayhi salam just answered us very clearly. A generalist is someone who knows a lot. Let's say it in a different way. Someone who knows a little bit about a lot of things. And with time, they can accumulate more knowledge. A specialist is someone who knows a lot about a few things. Is it better to be a specialist, to focus all of my time and energy learning and studying one thing, or one type of knowledge? Or is it better to become a generalist and know perhaps a little bit, but about a lot? Imam Ali alayhi salam said, there is a lot of information and a lot of knowledge out there. More than you can ever imagine. More than you could ever learn. Therefore, he said, go and learn from every type of knowledge the best that it has to offer. Does this necessarily mean do not become a specialist? No. Go and become a specialist. But that comes later. The first step is become a good generalist. Know enough about everything. What is the best that this has to offer? Not everything that it has to offer, because that means I become a specialist. What is the best that it has to offer? I go and learn it. Every field and every type. And in today's world, there are many, many who are calling for this. So one example is this book by an author by the name of David Epstein. He wrote a book called Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. I may have mentioned this book earlier in the series. So what does he say in this book? He says that the modern emphasis in universities and in the education system is for specialization. Generally, people are pushed into being good specialists. So he's saying what we need is an education system that first creates really good generalists, and then we can create our specialists. And you can start that very early on in your life. You don't need to wait until you're older to become a generalist. If the education system allowed for it, if it doesn't, then at least as parents, as communities, we need to think about this, do it for ourselves, apply this to ourselves. He's saying what should happen is that the earlier the better I start with broad, exploratory experience. I want to touch on enough things, broad, and I experience them myself as an exploration. I don't need to commit to any one of these fields. I want to touch as many of them as I can. And I'm going to come back today. We don't have enough time. Inshallah, in the next lecture, we're going to talk about experience. We're going to see that our religion even talks about this. It's very important, this notion of experience. Knowledge is not just theory and information and a guy like me talking to you and you're listening. Knowledge is also experiential. It's also based on your experience in life. You learn a lot more from your experience, directly experiencing things in life, than all the speeches and all the words that you can listen to. In any case, so he says early, broad, exploratory experience followed by later specialization. You want to specialize? You specialize after the general overview of what you could explore earlier. Build on breadth produces superior performance, more creativity, and better problem solving. So if you want to be successful, this is what he's arguing here. He's not really trying to tell people this is how you should be for yourself. This is indirect. The direct point here is that as societies, if we want to be more effective, more productive, compete better with other societies, then we should change the way we teach our youth so that we are producing more generalists. And these generalists are going to perform better, and so he uses evidence and research to show that the generalists who become specialists later perform much better in their fields. They are more effective and they are more creative in their fields because they know how to make many more connections. They think outside of their specific field, and so they are more creative. They know how to solve problems in different ways. And this is what we need, because the world is constantly changing and you need to have people who know how to see linkages that others did not see. That's why you have a problem. That's creativity. That's problem solving. So some of the factors he talks about the importance of having what he calls kind versus wicked learning environments. He says this is not going to work everywhere all the time for everyone. If you want someone to go around from one field to another, you also have to create an environment where people, when you're moving from one field to another, you are of course going to be more prone to making mistakes. So you have to create what he calls a kind learning environment. A learning environment where if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to lose $150 million overnight. Right? You have to create that environment so that it's okay to make the mistakes and to learn. And I'm going to come back to this point because this is going to be accompanied with oversight and mentoring. He talks about the sampling period without commitment. There shouldn't be an expectation that you will necessarily commit to a field if you are learning about it now. If I'm learning about finance, there's no commitment and expectation that I will necessarily specialize in finance. I need to learn enough about it. I may come back to it later, maybe not. I need to go learn about other fields too. Analogical transfer and integrative thinking. This is your ability, so this has to be built into how you educate people, your ability to create connections. That you move from one discipline to another. You have to be taught that. You have to be encouraged to think. If you are in biology, you have to be encouraged to think in mathematical terms, in statistical terms, in historical terms, in sociological terms. This is going to be what he calls analogical. And integrative is where a lot of, today we would call it multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary studies. Discovering the right fit. So if you are able to go through that, you'll have much more chance of ending up somewhere that you like because you've touched on enough things before. So what you're choosing is much more probably going to be a right fit for you. And therefore, greater life satisfaction and greater effectiveness on the job. Okay, so this is the logic of the book. And so he talks about the model that he presents should be, you first learn essential knowledge in life. We're going to come back to all of this in the series. Then you work on broad literacy. I'm going to come back to that. And then you move into specialization. So this is not to say you don't have specialists or that you don't specialize. It's the way to get there is different. You don't specialize on day one. You acquire a broad generalist understanding on day one. And you acquire everything you need in general in life. And then on top of that, you add a layer of specialization. And then he talks about transferable skills, civic literacy. So transferable skills, for instance, you have to learn critical thinking. Critical thinking is not always taught properly. And we're going to come back to that, inshallah, later in the series. And then I mentioned mentoring at the end. The ability to have someone who can share their own experiences. Someone that you can identify with. Someone who can provide guidance if guidance is needed. This adds to and creates the kind learning environment and ensures that you don't go too far astray. This is most likely someone who has a lot more experience, they've gone through it all, they know, as they say, where the alligators are, and they can help you avoid them. Correct? So inshallah, we'll stop here. There's a lot more to cover, but that's the next topics, inshallah. They will come in the next weeks. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Are there any questions, concerns, comments about anything we said? تفضلوا.
Say not so what you showed us from David Epstein. From what I understood, he's saying become a generalist and then move on to becoming a specialist.
Yeah.
But then when we compare that to what Imām ʿAlī said, from what I understood, he was only saying to become a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something I missed, or is Imām ʿAlī against becoming a specialist?
No, not at all. So I'm saying, because we won't have time to create this discussion everywhere. There's too many things to discuss. So here I just created a bit of space for the generalist discussion. We're going to see that as we continue to build on this, it's all cumulative, right? One piece adds to the previous piece. Until now with Imam Ali, we now establish therefore that becoming a generalist is good. Now we're going to see, once you have become a generalist, a good generalist, you can go and specialize. We haven't seen that yet, but it will come inshallah. Yeah, Allah yakhlikum. Tafadhal.
When we speak about the best of every knowledge, does that change from person to person? As in, if someone, for example, doesn't know that Ahlulbayt, is that the best knowledge for them to learn? Or is there a specific best when it comes to, say, Islamic sciences?
Ahsantum. So there's two questions in what you're asking. There is the perspective, does this change? Learning the best from every type of knowledge and the best that it has to offer. The Imam is not talking about the part that is subjective. We're going to come to that, inshallah. There's a component of knowledge that is subjective. And there's a component of it that is objective. Here Imam Ali alayhi salam is not talking about the subjective yet. He's talking about the objective. Looking at knowledge by itself on its own, he is saying that every knowledge has something good to offer. Go learn the best that it has to offer. That's it. We will then see how to prioritize, and a part of that is definitely going to be subjective. So what may be a priority for you may not be a priority for me. And this could be you because of who you are, or it could be you because of where you live, what you're going through, your current job, your needs and reality in life. All of that is going to be part of you as a subject. And then you have to see what applies to you and therefore will require that you prioritize certain knowledge over another. So inshallah, that's coming. Ahsantum. Excellent question. Tafadhal.
I do have a question regarding, which you left a little suspended, I don't know if you're going to answer it eventually, regarding the knowledge and reason in that relationship. My main question is, like, how do you quantify, let's say, call it the ratio between knowledge and reason? And how do you acquire that reason if not with knowledge? And that's the question, and perhaps can we call having the right amount of knowledge and reason wisdom?
Excellent question. I'll start from the end because that's a short answer, quick answer. How do we ensure that we have the right ratio between what we're calling reason and what we're calling knowledge? And so he said, can we call it wisdom? Yes, you can call it wisdom. You can call it the intellectual maturity to use that knowledge, right? And from our point of view, so if you are focusing on the religious dimension of that, from our religious point of view, it's ethics, it's akhlaq. It's what comes on the spiritual side, because that's to us what gives us our direction, what allows me to gauge how much of a priority a knowledge should be, how useful it is, and how I am to use it in the world, all comes from akhlaq. And then the akhlaq, if it's binding, becomes fiqh. If it's not binding, it stays in akhlaq, right? It's praxis, which is the application of your ideas. So if it's binding, then you're going to say, this is wajib, this is haram. You're not allowed to learn this. And exactly what we have. We have fuqaha, we have jurists who will say, you are not allowed to learn this type of knowledge, period. Or you are not allowed to do the research that may end up there because they are adding the ethical or the moral component to that knowledge. They're not looking at that knowledge itself. They're looking at where could humanity end up if we open that door. If we keep doing the research in this area here, where could we end up? We're going to end up in somewhere that is very risky, very problematic, very haram. And so therefore, from the beginning, they will say, you are not allowed to engage in this.
Okay. That also makes your example, which also came to my mind right away with the World War II, be a lot more practical in terms of like how bringing too much knowledge and not the right amount of ethics or so on. And it can also be, let's say, not a reflection, but what happened because of, like, let's say, the Enlightenment in terms of acquiring knowledge and leaving religion and leaving ethics aside to culminate into that happening into the world, right? And that, I want to tie into like the last point you made with generalist and specialized. Is there a point, I don't know if it has, I'm kind of tying it to like our previous lectures about the Enlightenment, how that affected the world. Is there a reason the world moved more from generalists and polymaths, and there you see a lot of the inventors or whatever at the time that would do like 10 different things, to more specialized knowledge? Is it we have too much knowledge now available at our hands, or is there a reason, and why did that happen around that time?
So first question about World War II. The reason I mentioned it, and it became very real, one, it's a lot more relevant. Like where we're living today in history is very much a continuation of what has happened in the world since World War II. Right? There's like paradigm shifts in the world. You enter into a new era. Since World War II, the world entered into a new era. So it makes sense to go back to that and see what happened there and how it has evolved into where we're at today. Okay, so that's one. And this is where you see like even the big philosophers and the thinkers of the main fields like sociology, cultural studies, others, they started to talk about what does theory mean? And they said theory must now include the critical dimension, and criticality or critical thinking has to be included in the theory of every field. So the theory of sociology, the theory of psychology, the theory of has to include, theory now includes critical thinking, because they are trying to move towards that. They just don't want to call it ethics or morality because they are allergic to these words. Okay, let's just put that this way. There's a lot more to say, but so Adorno and other thinkers have written a lot about that. It's a whole school of thought. That's one. To your second question with regards to the generalist versus the specialist, why has the world moved towards the specialists? I'm going to come back to this point. But in short, I'm going to say three things now. The first one is, later in the series, we want to talk about what the main thinkers who have looked at the education system are saying about it. And I'll give you the punchline now. The current education system is not meant to be an education system. It is meant to produce people who can work in fields to produce money in those fields, which is a very different thing than to produce people who are educated. Okay, so once you understand that, and all those who have looked at the education system have said that, but the solutions they have provided for this are different, then you have to rethink what it means and why you may have today what you're referring to as more specialists than generalists. Generalists are harmful for that kind of outcome that you're hoping for, and specialists are exactly what you need. They're contained, they stay within their lane, and they produce what they're asked to produce. Okay, that's one. Two, when it comes to why do we have a lot more specialists, fewer generalists, and fewer polymaths, as you mentioned, one is the point you mentioned. The type and nature and quantity of knowledge has drastically changed. Like no one a couple of centuries ago could imagine how many fields there exist today under psychology or sociology or philosophy. So it does not like compare, it has grown exponentially. And I'm using exponentially literally, okay, not as a metaphor, not a hyperbole. One. Two, it could be very clearly established, and this is a point that was perhaps made indirectly last week, and inshallah this is what I'm trying to get at from this series, and that's why I'm insisting on the generalist, is that I believe the generalists were randomly appearing in the world, from here and there. In every society you have geniuses, you have people who are very open and intelligent and they want to learn everything and they're curious and they have the right conditions to learn, and so they become polymaths, encyclopedic scholars in a lot of fields. You have that in every society. But in Islamic societies, it was disproportionate. We have too many polymaths. Wherever you look, wherever time you take in Islamic history, you'll find polymaths. Why? Because this is what Islam teaches. All you need to do is follow Islamic teaching and you'll end up being a polymath if you go all the way to your full learning. You won't become a specialist. In fact, I don't know, I'm gonna dare you, go home and think about how many specialists you could think of in the big names in Islam. How many of them are specialists? They specialized in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 fields, but they were all polymaths. The philosopher is also the physician, the medical doctor, and he's also the engineer, and he's also the mathematician, and he's also an inventor of optical, lenses, and he's also a historian. And why? And in addition to being a faqih, and he learned the Quran by heart, and he has treatises on theology, and what's happening? And this is not 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 of these scholars. And so part of what I'm trying to say here is that the Islamic way of looking at knowledge produces polymaths. It doesn't produce specialized one-lane, one-trick ponies, right? It doesn't produce people who stay within one field of specialization, specifically because of these types of instructions in our religion. And this is what you need, and this is what this series is meant to do. And inshallah, we tried to show that in the previous introductory lesson, claiming that Islam says, learn all of this. These are the types of knowledge we're going to talk about because we say this is what Islam asks us to learn, which is everything. Except that we can't learn everything about everything, but we can try to do what Imam Ali alayhi salam said, which is to learn the best that everything has to offer. Okay? So one of the punchlines, inshallah, is we need to go back to producing polymaths. And this comes from having amazing generalists who keep becoming specialists. But we need generalists first. Right? So that's your foundation layer, and those who keep going will start to specialize in 1 or 2 or 3 or more fields. But before you look at your specialization, you'll see that they were amazing generalists first, and they just kept going in their specializations, and then because they have that foundation, they were able to specialize in multiple fields. Anyways, that was a very long answer. I said I'll keep it short. Tfaddal.
Bear with me. In listening to you talk about the hadith of Imām and the way that the Prophet intervened or was dismantling the idea of ulama, and this idea of not accepting social norms. And then I'm thinking about how, correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of our prophets were shepherds, with the exception of Nabi Isa, I think, who was a carpenter. And so I'm wondering if there's a connection between, because when you said we have to think about why Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam was asking the question regarding ulama, is reminding me of he began as a shepherd, which is a very, humble and, but also can be seen as training. And specifically with sheep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, not camels, not snakes, not horses, sheep. And just sort of a parallel between how one's job or one's profession, can, to be careful of what you choose because it can change you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a long-winded way of trying to think about, is there a parallel between this idea of generalist and the prophets beginning as a shepherd in training, and then how they then became specialized as the Rasul, which is a particular status, of course, that they can only reach.
Yeah.
Because I'm juxtapositioning that idea of a shepherd who also this notion of power, not wanting to bow to someone like the Prophet, alayhi salam. So not sure if the question is clear, but if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack in your question. So first, a few points. First, when it comes to the point that you made regarding the type of work that you do, the career that you choose, and so on and so forth, I'd like to focus on one aspect, which is, of course, we do believe that there is more knowledge than what you learn, in an official, formal setting, and so on and so forth. Not all knowledge is acquired this way. There's a lot of wisdom for someone who has a predisposition to be wise, to go and look much more deeply into day-to-day life and experience, and become a gigantic mastermind and a philosopher and a thinker in a lot of different fields. Technical fields, they require a more formal setting. There's terminology, so it becomes kind of much more limited to actually be able to advance in those fields. And in today's world, with its complexity, with its nuances, with its sophistication, it's difficult to say that you can truly go to the bottom of any field without having some formal grounding in it. Okay, so that's the first point. The second point is regarding the previous, let's say, livelihood or careers, if you want to call them, of prophets. There is a generally understood and more or less accepted idea that all of the prophets or all of the big ones were at some point in their earlier lives shepherds. We have many of our scholars who have entirely disputed and rejected that. And some have gone to more great lengths, especially with the Holy Prophet, to show that he was actually never a shepherd, that he was working as, today we would call him a businessman, as a merchant. He was in the market, he would buy and sell, and so on and so forth, and never was he a shepherd taking sheep. Okay, and there are a lot of connotations associated with that. I don't want to go into it right now, but in part there is an image of the Holy Prophet specifically that it seems Quraysh wanted to create, and that has persisted in Islamic history, that makes the Holy Prophet be someone who is poor and weak and very, very simple, from very, very humble beginnings. And to a large extent, this is contrary to reality. Even though he may not have been the wealthiest, he does come from a very powerful and wealthy family, Bani Hashim, that, if I wanted to put it bluntly today, no one dared to mess with. They had tremendous power and tremendous, in sociology they would call it symbolic capital. They are people who are very well respected. They are considered the elites of society. And in that environment, it would be degrading. We're not using Islamic norms, we're using social norms. It is degrading to consider someone like the Prophet to be a shepherd of sheep, right? And so there is that idea of, that perpetuates itself, that he comes from very humble beginnings and how he came to Khadija, radwanullah alayha, and all of that. This may have been very, very much exaggerated. His humble beginnings are not in that way. Even his uncle Abu Talib and Abdul Muttalib and others, they were, at least in various points in their lives, extremely wealthy. Abu Talib seems to have had a store of perfumes, and anyone who worked in perfumes at that time would have been considered someone very wealthy. Perfumes came from all over the world, and very, very rare and exotic possessions, and being able to buy them and sell them is not easy. This is one of the things that Abu Talib did. And in any case, there's a lot more to say and unpack here. Just to say, let's not take for granted as a given that the Holy Prophet was a shepherd, and the same could be said for many other prophets too. We just don't have historical foundations to use. All of that said, those who have said they were shepherds, the idea is simply that God wanted to put them through an experience where they have to take care of other entities, truly in the sense of taking care of them. Making sure that none of them are going to get lost, making sure that all of them are well managed, administered, all of them eat, all of them sleep, the wolf does not attack them, because this becomes a microcosm or a metaphor for human society. And so when they come to human beings to, administer and manage and all of that, it makes kind of for a logical transition. I understand the point. I think it's a little cheap to use kind of that type of wording. Yes, it makes sense, but prophets would not need to. I mean, any human being today in society who grows up in a highly socially interactive environment will learn how to be with people, how to manage people, how to interact with them. Whether they are introverted or extroverted, they will know how to carry themselves in society. And if they need to be a leader, they will know how to be a leader. God does not necessarily need to put them through, in charge of sheep to learn how to be with people and to be a leader of people. So, but this is an idea that, unfortunately, I say, has perpetuated itself because I think it's very easy and kind of a romantic idea that all of them were shepherds at some point, and then they become responsible for their flock. And the flock goes from being a flock of human beings to a flock of sheep to a flock of human beings. That's kind of my initial reactions to it.
So is it fair to say in response to that, that the fixation on shepherd is reductionist, is minimalistic, like it's a...
Well, my first issue is I think it's baseless, it's not founded.
Okay, yeah.
And two, I don't think it's necessary. Like, let's not create it if it is not there. You don't need, this is not the only way to become a good leader of human beings. And I think we would all agree. You know, there are better ways to lead human beings, perhaps simply by leading human beings and learning that way, as opposed to learning how to lead sheep first and then learning how to lead human beings. That's my issue there.
Thank you.
Allah yakhlikum. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.